Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro, where urban sprawl gives way to quieter suburban life, an encounter in the autumn of 1977 would challenge the boundaries of both belief and established UFO contact patterns. The events that unfolded in Paciencia that September morning presented investigators with a case that defied categorisation, featuring entities so strange that even within the diverse catalogue of close encounters, they stand uniquely apart. Antonio La Rubia's position as a bus driver for the Oriental Bus Company demanded an early start to each day. The pre-dawn hours of September 15th found him following his established routine in the modest suburb some 45 kilometres or about 28 miles from Rio's bustling centre. At 2 a.m, while most of Paciencia slept, La Rubia performed his morning preparations with practised efficiency, stepping out into the dark streets at exactly 2:20 a.m. The crisp morning air carried no hint of the extraordinary events about to unfold. As La Rubia made his way toward work, his attention was drawn to what appeared to be an unusual reflection in a nearby field. His initial assumption that another company bus had deviated from its route dissolved into astonishment as the true nature of what lay before him became apparent. There, dominating the landscape, rested a craft of impossible proportions, a disc-shaped object spanning approximately 70 metres or over 200 feet in diameter, its dull leaden surface extending beyond the field's boundaries. The craft's hat-like silhouette stood in stark contrast against the pre-dawn sky, its presence defying La Rubia's firmly held scepticism about the UFO phenomenon. The rational portion of La Rubia's mind, the part that had never entertained the possibility of extraterrestrial contact, urged him to retreat. Yet in the instant he turned to flee, an intense blue light pierced the darkness, leaving him immobilised beside an electrical pole. What followed would introduce into UFO literature some of the most bizarrely described entities ever documented. The beings that materialised around La Rubia, one before him, one to his side, and one behind, bore little resemblance to the typical humanoid aliens reported in other encounters. Standing just under 4.5 feet tall, their bodies suggested a merging of organic and mechanical design that would later cause researchers to debate whether they represented living beings, robots, or some sort of amalgam of both. Their heads, shaped like American footballs, featured a distinctive horizontal band of blue mirrors, creating an unsettling visage that seemed to observe La Rubia from multiple angles simultaneously. Above these mirrored bands, antennae spun with such velocity that their true form remained indiscernible, extending upward beyond La Rubia's own height of 5 feet 5 inches. The entities' bodies defied conventional anatomical logic. Their torsos, broader than La Rubia's despite his muscular build, suggested the form of metal kegs. A complex pattern of scales covered their surfaces, not as armour, but as what appeared to be their actual exterior composition. Most striking were their appendages, elephantine trunks that served as arms, each terminating in a single pointed digit. These beings balanced upon individual leg-like pedestals, each ending in a circular platform reminiscent of a ship's stool. They moved without walking, hovering slightly above the ground in an effortless defiance of gravity. La Rubia found himself trapped within what he would later describe as an invisible bell jar or mason jar, able to move his arms but otherwise immobilized. One of the entities, equipped like its companions with a utility belt holding various instruments, directed a syringe-like device towards him. La Rubia felt himself drawn inexorably toward the massive craft, though the actual moment of entry would remain forever blank in his memory. His first conscious awareness inside the vessel placed him in a corridor of aluminium composition, its walls possessing an impossible transparency that allowed him to witness the ground falling away as the craft moved south to north. Two of his captors departed in one direction, the third in another, leaving him momentarily alone before another brilliant blue flash transported him to the heart of the vessel. The circular chamber that materialized around him presented a scene that stretched the boundaries of human comprehension. Light cascaded from the ceiling in gradually shifting hues, blending seamlessly with the metallic walls. Here, arranged in what bizarrely reminded La Rubia of a classroom configuration, sat 24 identical entities. Their single-legged postures created an uncanny impression of students awaiting instruction. Finding his voice for the first time since his capture, La Rubia shouted, "What do you want? Who are you?" The being's reaction proved extraordinary. They collapsed collectively to the floor, their previously spinning antennae freezing in position. Using their trunk-like appendages, they grasped at these now stationary protrusions, which La Rubia could finally see resembled teaspoons in shape. A single piece of equipment dominated the chamber, a console that stood before La Rubia, its dimensions remarkably modest given the vessel's scale. This device, merely 15 to 17 centimetres or about 6 to 7 inches in width, rose to chest height on dual supporting poles. Its design suggested a miniature piano, complete with keys along one side and antennae protruding from either end. A metal receptacle integrated into its surface accepted objects the beings periodically removed from their belts. What followed was an extraordinary display that blended elements of examination, prophecy, and unfathomable imagery. The beings began approaching the console in sequence, each removing syringe-like devices from their belts and inserting them into the machine's receptacle. With each insertion and subsequent manipulation of the keys, vivid colour images materialised on the chamber's walls, creating a disturbing panorama of past, present and future events. The first projection appeared to show an examination taking place simultaneously in another part of the craft. La Rubia himself, stripped of clothing and lying upon an invisible examination table. His limbs flailed involuntarily while two entities directed blue lights towards his chest and head. A third being examined his skull with the same peculiar blue light, which produced no visible beam, yet cast everything, including his hair, in a bright blue glow. This scene dissolved into what seemed to be a series of predictions. First, showing La Rubia standing naked, followed by a vision of what would soon come to pass. La Rubia fully clothed, but visibly distressed, his shopping bag clutched in one hand, while his teeth chattered and arms swung rhythmically. These images would prove prophetic, accurately depicting the physical symptoms he would experience after his return. The projections then shifted to other scenes beyond La Rubia's immediate experience. A horse-drawn cart appeared, traversing a dirt road with a barefoot peasant at its reins, his straw hat and torn shirt suggesting a timeless rural poverty. This mundane scene gave way to more mysterious visions. La Rubia witnessed himself standing beside a glowing orange sphere, followed by the same sphere transformed to a blue hue, accompanied by one of the entities. Perhaps most disturbing was the seventh projection, showing a large dog, mouth foaming with aggression, attempting to attack one of the beings. After several fierce barks, the entity began to dissolve from top to bottom, its form collapsing like porridge. This demonstration of vulnerability, or perhaps power, gave way to an industrial panorama, a vast white factory space stretching beyond visual limits, containing 3 rows of UFOs in various stages of construction. Rubia described seeing millions of these beings moving among the craft, though he noted a curious absence of visible tools. The sequence continued with images of a dilapidated train reminiscent of Japanese models then operating in Brazil, but notably lacking windows, disappearing into a tunnel. The final projection displayed a crowded avenue that investigator Irene Granchi would later compare to Rio's bustling Avenida Presidente Vargas, its lanes choked with vehicles. During this bizarre presentation, one of the entities approached Rubia and initiated a procedure that would leave him particularly unsettled. Taking one of the syringe-like devices from its belt, the being transferred it between its appendages, causing it to spin with such velocity that Rubia's eyes could not track its movement. When pointed at him, his right arm rose involuntarily, and the device extracted blood from his middle finger, though he felt no sensation and would find no mark afterward. The blood, standing out as the only vivid colour in the otherwise metallic environment, nearly overflowed the device. Using this biological sample, the being drew 3 interconnected circles on the chamber wall, bisecting them with an L-shaped mark. Rubia's return to Earth proved as abrupt as his departure. Following the final image of the congested avenue, he found himself unceremoniously thrown overboard, landing on a street opposite the Paciencia station. One of the entities briefly materialised beside him before vanishing, leaving him with all his belongings, including his shopping bag, which had not accompanied him aboard the craft. Above him, what appeared to be the bottom of a dark, smooth balloon ascended until it vanished from view. A glance at his watch revealed a peculiar temporal anomaly. It still read 2:20 a.m., the exact moment of his initial encounter. Yet when he checked the time at the Paciencia station, he discovered it was between 2:50 and 2:55 a.m. This 30-minute discrepancy would become just one of many puzzling aspects of his experience. Despite his ordeal, Rubia managed to catch his 3:10 a.m. bus and report for his shift, though the true impact of his encounter would soon manifest in devastating fashion. The first signs of physical distress emerged during his initial day of work. While operating his bus route, Rubia experienced intermittent darkening of vision, accompanied by a growing sense of illness and generalised body aches. He persevered through Thursday and continued working on Friday, but by nightfall his condition had deteriorated significantly. It was at this point that he recalled another image shown during his encounter, a projection of himself with smoke emanating from his back, a prescient vision of the burning sensation that now began to overwhelm him. That Friday night marked the beginning of a severe decline in his health. His bowels became loose and a profound feeling of misery settled over him. By Saturday, his condition had worsened to the point where work became impossible. Sunday brought no relief. The burning sensation intensified, spreading throughout his body with excruciating effect. His wife attempted to provide comfort by applying alcohol to his skin, achieving only minimal relief. By Monday morning, Rubia's condition had become critical. Returning to the bus company to tender his resignation, he exhibited such severe symptoms that fellow employees described him as appearing as green as grass. The burning sensation had become so intense that he begged colleagues to hose him down with water. Most peculiarly, he reported feeling as though he was walking on a cloud, a sensation that would persist for at least 33 days following the encounter. The company nurse's attempt to administer a tranquilizer met with desperate resistance from Rubia, who feared any medication might exacerbate his condition. His apparent distress and references to UFOs led clinic personnel to believe he had suffered a psychological breakdown. They proceeded to physically restrain him with ropes, preparing him for psychiatric intervention. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Nellie Carbonell, the bus company's psychologist, examined Rubia. In a puzzling sequence of events, she pronounced him psychologically normal, yet still recommended immediate hospitalisation. At the hospital, doctors were confronted with a patient whose physical symptoms defied easy explanation. Rubia's temperature had climbed to a dangerous 103 degrees Fahrenheit, yet initial examinations revealed no obvious cause for his condition. The case took on new significance when one of the attending physicians, processing Rubia's workers' employer relief claim, learned of the UFO encounter. Intrigued by the unusual constellation of symptoms, he summoned 6 colleagues to examine the case. This impromptu medical conference suggested that something beyond routine illness or psychological disturbance was at work. News of the incident drew the attention of prominent UFO researcher Irene Granchi, who first travelled to Paciencia on October 8th to investigate. Her initial attempts to interview Rubia proved unsuccessful. He remained too emotionally disturbed to discuss the events. It wasn't until October 18th that he felt capable of recounting his experience, arriving at Granchi's home accompanied by his brother Amaldo. Though Granchi's preliminary interview lasted only 40 minutes due to teaching commitments, it established a foundation for what would become one of Brazil's most meticulously documented close encounter cases. Rubia's account displayed a level of detail and internal consistency that impressed investigators, particularly regarding the being's bizarre appearance and behaviour. The investigation would later reveal a single corroborating witness, though this individual's credibility immediately came into question. A local resident, known in the community for his drinking habits, reported seeing a UFO that same morning. This testimony, while potentially supporting Rubia's account, raised an obvious question. How could an object of such massive proportions traverse a populated area with only one additional witness? Physical evidence proved equally elusive. Despite the craft's enormous size, Granchi and Rubia's subsequent examination of the field revealed no landing traces, no impressions, no burned grass, no ground disturbance of any kind. This absence of physical evidence would later fuel skeptics' arguments, though supporters suggested the craft's apparent hovering state explained the lack of ground traces. The case presents several elements that challenge conventional understanding. The being's reaction to sound, collapsing when Rubia shouted, seems particularly problematic given their audible breathing. If Rubia's voice caused them such distress, their own respiratory sounds, which he could hear over the hum of the ship, should have been equally devastating to them. Yet the medical aspects of the case remain difficult to dismiss. Rubia's physical symptoms followed a clear progression witnessed by multiple healthcare professionals. His initial examination by a psychologist who found him mentally sound, followed by the interest of 7 hospital physicians, suggests something beyond simple hysteria or fabrication. The persistence of his symptoms, particularly the sensation of walking on a cloud that lasted over a month, adds weight to the physical impact of whatever he experienced. Some researchers have proposed that La Rubia's encounter might represent a fever dream or hallucination brought on by an underlying illness. This hypothesis suggests that rather than the UFO encounter causing his subsequent illness, an existing medical condition might have generated the entire experience. The length and severity of his symptoms, which exceeded typical post-encounter reactions reported in other cases, could support this interpretation. However, the precision and consistency of La Rubia's account argue against simple hallucination. The beings he described were unlike any previously reported in UFO literature. Their single-legged, barrel-bodied appearance with spinning antennae and elephant trunk arms represented a departure from typical alien descriptions. If fabricating his story, why would La Rubia invent entities so bizarre they risked straining his credibility? The Paciencia incident remains one of Brazil's most puzzling close encounter cases, distinguished by both the unprecedented nature of the entities described and the severe physiological effects documented in the witness. While some elements strain scientific credibility, others, particularly the medical evidence and the consistency of testimony, resist simple dismissal. As Irene Granchi noted in her final analysis, the case raises profound questions about what the beings were attempting to communicate. The projected imagery, their demonstration of both vulnerability and technological superiority, and their interest in human biological samples suggested complex intentions. Whether interpreted as genuine extraterrestrial contact or as a product of illness-induced hallucination, the La Rubia incident continues to challenge our understanding of close encounter phenomena and the boundaries between objective experience and subjective perception. In the decades since La Rubia's encounter, no similar entities have been reported in UFO literature. No other witnesses have described beings with spinning antennae, elephant trunk appendages, and single-legged bodies. The severity and duration of his documented medical symptoms, witnessed by multiple healthcare professionals and lasting more than a month, stand in stark contrast to typical UFO encounter reports. As Granchi pointedly concluded in her investigation, shall we have time to reflect on all this before they come over in larger hordes? Her words remain unanswered. The peculiar beings that appeared in Paciencia that September morning have never returned.